If you can learn how to learn, you could apply that towards anything. The world is yours. I go into companies to help them to be able to learn faster, to be able to keep up with the data overwhelm that everyone's struggling with. There's no such thing as a good or bad memory. There's a trained memory and an untrained memory. The reason I'm so passionate about it is because of my brain injury when I was 5. I had all those labels and learning challenges. That became who I was. All behavior is belief-driven. The 2 most powerful words in the English language are the 2 smallest, I am. Because whatever you put after that determines your life, your destiny.
I introduce you as this guy about learning and memory. You're a lot more than that. You really are a philosopher.
If you knew how truly powerful your mind was, you wouldn't say, think, or feel something you didn't want to be true. You matter. You are enough. You might not see it all the time, but you inspire people with your grit, with your grace. Here's my advice, summed up. Know yourself, trust yourself, love yourself, be yourself.
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is...
I love the energy of Jim Kwik. And when he's not hanging out with people like Will Smith and Elon Musk and Richard Branson, he's here to help you learn. Because Jim believes that knowledge is power, but learning is a superpower. And if you can learn how to learn, you can change your life. You can get better work, have better relationships, or have a greater impact on this world. But that's not all we talked about. We also talked about the conversation we all have in our brains about how positive self-talk can get you to the next level. And finally, we talked about digital overload, that device in your pocket that's constantly running your life. It's time for you to take charge. And I really enjoyed sitting down with Jim. He's such an emotional guy. He's had such a crazy journey, and he just wants to help more people in this world. So now, enjoy my conversation with Jim. This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Jim Kwik, the world expert in speed reading, memory improvement, brain performance, and accelerated learning. After a childhood head injury left you learning challenged, you overcame it by creating strategies to dramatically enhance your mental performance. Since then, you've dedicated your life to helping others unleash their own brain power and serve as a coach to many of the world's leading CEOs and celebrities, including Elon Musk, Will Smith, and the cast of Xmen. Your message is that knowledge is power, but learning is a superpower. Jim, welcome back to London Real.
Brian, thank you so much for having me. I love this show so much. So thank you everyone who's watching.
Thank you so much, man. Everybody loved last time, and it's been watched and clipped and everything just like millions of times.
I know, it's amazing. It's a great statement out there in terms of where people are in terms of transformation.
Yeah.
The nature of this work. I know that's your mission, global transformation and impact. And everyone who's watching, I feel like they're watching for a reason. And this is a conversation that more and more people are having about transcending, about ending the trance, that we're not enough, and that we have these preconceived limits. And yeah.
And that's what I love about your stuff, because you have a lot of practical stuff for learning and memory, but then a lot of your stuff is a lot about mindset and a lot of other ways that we use this thing in our heads,
right.
And love it. Like you said, when you're doing that, it's like being mindful of your brain and kind of loving your brain, right?
It is. I mean, people see me always kind of pose with this, touching, because this matters, our gray matter. We just don't see it. We can see our external features, And we have you could have a personal trainer that makes you stronger and more flexible, more agile, more energized. But what about mentally? You want to be mentally agile, mentally more flexible, mentally energized and strong. And so I'm a big advocate for not only mental intelligence, but also mental fitness.
Yeah.
I feel like we're in the age of, part of it is we're in the age of the mind.
Yeah, and I want to talk about some of this stuff because you've had some amazing people on your podcast, and you're always pushing the limits and trying to get new ways of thinking out there to people. So I'm really curious to dive into that. But first, you're here in London. I know you spent some time in Greece recently.
Yeah.
Why Greece? What's going on there? What's it like being there?
Yeah, well, it's good to be back in London. I flew in last night from Greece. I'm doing a lot of writing. And the reason why I chose Greece the past couple of weeks is because a lot of people don't know. It's where, like, some people say it's the birthplace of ancient mnemonic training, memory training. The goddess Mnemosyne, she connected with Zeus, and they had 9 muses and 9 goddesses of literature, of science, of art. And isn't it interesting that the mother of the arts and sciences and literature is the goddess of memory? It's the same derivative of Mnemosyne as mnemonic, which is remembrance.
Okay.
And I think if your life is worth living, it's worth remembering. But this is a time, let's say a few thousand years ago, where they didn't have printing presses. Like, how did people remember? I mean, how did they pass on information if there were no printing presses, there were no smartphones?
Right.
And they did it through oral tradition, and they would use these ancient memory techniques, if you will, mind palaces and memory palaces, location methods and such, to be able to store huge amounts of knowledge.
Right, because Homer did the Iliad and Odysseus, right? But he used to recite those things from memory, right? I thought I remember that when I was a kid. I don't know.
It's astonishing. The classic example is the poet Simonides. He's a Greek orator about 2,500 years ago, and he was giving a poetry reading, and when he left the building, something really tragic happened. The building collapsed, and it killed everyone that was there. And because he was the lone survivor, he had the responsibility to help their family members identify their loved ones. And back then, this building wasn't made of sheetrock and wood. It was made out of stone, and it was unidentifiable. But he was able to remember because he remembered where each of them were sitting. Because as human beings, we remember where things are. As a hunter-gatherer, we didn't need to necessarily memorize numbers and technical words. We needed to remember where the clean water is, where the enemy tribe is, where's the food, because that was our survival. So they created techniques, very simple techniques of taking places that are very familiar with you, like maybe your home, and storing relevant, valuable information in each of those places. So it could be like a little mental filing system. And there's a show, and I love London. We talked about this last time, that amazing genius has come out of this area. Mary Shelley and Shakespeare and even fictional works. Sherlock we talked about.
Yeah,
and Sherlock used these mind palaces also as well. He was obviously
Loki. Is that what you call that?
Yeah.
Okay.
The method of Loki.
Right.
Or Loki.
And last time you walked me through a whole thing where we went to the parking lot.
Right.
I remember food in the parking lot. That was a year ago, but I bet I could still remember a lot of those things.
That's amazing.
So that's the way of kind of understanding why the brain originally was created, and to learn things kind of spatially for survival, and then using that to allow yourself to kind of hack your own memory.
And I think it's important to remember, we talk about content is king. We hear that a lot. And I think if content is king, then context is the kingdom. And even when you forget someone's name, which I know we've talked about in the past, and how important a skill it is to show someone you care by remembering them, one of the questions you ask yourself is, where do I know this person from? Because with the where creates the context, and then often the memory is there also as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I want to talk a bit more about that because, as our devices get smarter and they become more of who we are, that whole thing of why do we need memory is something I'd really like to revisit today. Because, 5 years, 10 years from now, We'll still have, we'll be partial cyborgs maybe at that point if you speak to Elon Musk, but yet the memory is still really important.
Yes.
And I'd love to talk about that a little bit.
I've done, and I'm looking forward to going deep in that. I do trainings for Google, and it's, they're organizing the world's information. And my mission really is helping people to remember the important parts of it, because memory is a force multiplier. It's one of those things. I challenge anyone to think of anything that they do or want to accomplish that doesn't require memory. Anything, whether it's kinesthetic body memory or remembering, like if we lost, look at the other end, if we forgot half of what we know or knew, half the words, half the people, half of our expertise, we wouldn't be very functional.
Yeah.
And so imagine if we could double our capacity to learn in a fraction of the time, then we become extremely productive and powerful. And I'm not talking about frantic fast. When I teach people how to read 2 or 3 times faster, I mean in efficiency and effectiveness. You can imagine when you were, great documentary, by the way, Iron Mind, when you're training for something, your body, if you had some kind of physical challenge, or let's say we're walking up a hill, you could do it at a level of efficiency and effectiveness than somebody who wasn't in as physically in shape, because you're strong and you don't have to use as much energy. Same thing when I read, whether it's reading a book a day or people see me on stage, 100 people stand up and introduce themselves, and I recite everyone's name or large numbers or
remember
words.
Numbers, they say.
Everyone could do that, and it's not something. There's no such thing as a good or bad memory. There's a trained memory and an untrained memory, and this works no matter your age, your background, your career, your education, your financial situation, your gender, your history, your IQ. None of that matters. What matters is, just like with anything, is focus and putting in the work. And so it might not always be easy, but it's so worth it. It's like describing to somebody what a rainbow looks like that has never seen a rainbow, or describing what a rose smells like, who's never smelled a rose. And that's, I believe people, my mission is, I believe people have genius inside of them. And I'm not talking about an IQ or number. I mean, they have strengths and talents. And I want to be able to create an environment where they could let it out, because the world needs more of that.
And they're just not using their brain in the right way, or exercising it, or using it to their full capacity. And then on top of that, they put all the other negative self-talk on there.
Oh my goodness.
They just marginalize themselves.
It is. And it's not necessarily, if people feel overwhelmed in this digital age, like there's too much information too little time, or they feel distracted, like they can't maintain their focus or concentration to get things done, or they have a little bit of memory loss. Senior moments are coming too early. They'll read a page in a book, get to the end, and just forget what they just read. It's not really their fault. They were never taught. You were gifted this most incredible device in the whole known universe, but it doesn't come with an owner's manual. And certainly we didn't learn how to use it in school. School is a great place to learn. They teach you what to learn and what to think and what to remember, but not necessarily how to learn, how to think, and how to remember those things. Yeah. And I want to close that gap.
Yeah. And one thing I'm realizing with London Real is that we learn by stories, just like Homer knew with Odysseus and the Iliad, and just like our hunter-gatherer ancestors probably knew, it was a story base. So, someone can read a book about memory, but when Jim Kwik comes on and tells them your story and these ideas and techniques, people might never forget it. And again, that's why the personality sometimes can bring lessons. And I think we're seeing this whole new way of people learning around the world with long-form content, whether it's podcasts or YouTube videos. And it's just amazing to see, people connect. I had Jordan Peterson in here, and the night before he came in, he was at the O2 Arena with 7,000 people in a concert venue that I had seen Beyonce perform at. And he was having a debate with Sam Harris about religion. And he said, Brian, we're learning that people aren't as stupid as we thought they were. What he's trying to say is that everybody wants a nuanced conversation and wants to learn things.
Right.
It's just we never gave them a really good way in the past. It was like, go to school and memorize this. But now you can give them these long-form, nuanced stories and conversations, and people are kind of craving it. And so it's kind of an exciting time.
And it's amazing how you're able to, with London Real, with your audience, with your academy, classrooms now, they don't have four walls. They're not limited. I mean, you have access to this amazing information, and to be able to eavesdrop and partake in and participate in a conversation in this arena. I mean, how often do people have genius and greatness whispered or shared with them? And I love this because these conversations are so important, because if I give you $1, you give me $1 a pound, we have the same amount. But if I share a new idea with you and you share a brand new idea with me, all of a sudden we have those two brand new ideas. And that's a good starting point for creating positive change.
Yeah, it's like wealth creation,
Right, something that wasn't there before.
Yeah. And I think I was telling you, like 2 hours ago, I was walking down the street to go train at the gym, and two guys in a garbage truck shouted out and were like, "London Real, what's going on, Brian?" And I got them on video, and I'm like, "What are you watching?" And they're like, Sadhguru, this Indian mystic, Dan Payne, high performance guy. They watch my Iron Man movie. So here are guys that are riding around in this truck all day, and they're learning, listening to these new ideas. Probably watch you too, I'm sure they have. And they're developing their minds. So it's just, everybody craves this stuff. It's just.
I do. I think it's part of our DNA that in order to feel completely fulfilled, that we need to be able to feel like we're making progress, that we grow. And because we grow, we have more to be able to give to the people around us.
Yeah. You mentioned Google, and I think you might have gone to see those guys right after you left, because I think I was watching your Instagram feed, and I'm not just gonna rattle these off, but I guess I will. But like, it's with you, it's Google and Virgin and Nike and Zappos and SpaceX and places like NYU and Harvard and Caltech, where my dad went, and Singularity University that you work with. And again, you've got Google, which is a search engine known for having all the information in the world, and they still want Jim Kwik to come and teach them about their own brains. And I'm always curious, what do these people want you to teach them? Why do they call you? Because they have other things to do with their time, and they're choosing to have you there. And I'm always kind of curious, what do you actually teach them?
Yeah, so behind closed doors, it ranges, obviously, but I can give you a few examples. I think everybody watching this, there are these digital challenges that other generations didn't have to deal with. So one of them is overload. You could have a lot of information in your job, because a lot of us, we're not paid necessarily for our muscle power, it's more our mind power. It's not our brute strength, but it's really this age, it's our brain strength. And knowledge is not only power, it's profit. And I don't mean financial profit, that's obvious, right? The faster you can learn, the faster you can earn in today's economy. But I mean all the treasures of your life, because when you can learn how to learn, you can apply that towards your relationships, towards your wellness, towards your career. And I would say that inside of these companies, whether they're individuals or organizations, the greatest advantage, competitive, sustainable advantage in a world full of fast change is our ability to be able to absorb, to be able to assimilate, to be able to apply new information. And that really comes down to really understanding how our mind works. And so I am obsessed with solving this riddle of how does my brain work so I can work my brain. And not just to recite ivory tower, research, but really how does that affect us on a day-to-day, application, and where it's holding us back from getting our to-dos done, for us finding more of the things that light us up. Because I feel like a lot of people, I see this on social media a lot, they'll complain about being burnt out, or they'll complain about being tired. And I don't think necessarily in every case that we're burnt out or tired because we're doing too much, but maybe we're doing too little of the things that really matter, that make us feel alive. And I always talk about the most important thing is to keep the most important thing the most important thing. Because just like Dr. Stephen Covey, he talks about putting, first things first and beginning with the end in mind. And if you're climbing the ladder of success and you get all the way to the top and you realize it's leaning on the wrong wall, better to know earlier than later. And so beginning with the end in mind is kind of like this idea where you go fast forward all the way to when we're taking our last breaths. And at that time, nobody's opinions or our fears, none of that's gonna matter. What's gonna matter is how we lived, how we loved, how we laughed, how we learned. And I think people have to come from that place. And nobody has this perfect. And everyone has to find, you and I in our last conversation talked about balance. And I've been reflecting on this thing called balance because we use it a lot. And the words we choose affect how we process and perceive the world. And I was thinking about balance. When I'm thinking about balance, I was thinking like, wow, sometimes it's, balance beam and it's a little bit stressful trying to get everything equal weight, because that's what balance ultimately means, like a balance. I've been using the word harmony a lot more because I feel maybe my goal is not to make everything absolutely equal, the amount of time in my relationship, to the amount of time I spend in the gym, to the amount of time that I'm working on my career. But maybe the goal is like an orchestra. Each instrument, they don't necessarily have equal time, but they come together in a way that creates art, a symphony. And that's how I'm looking at life. So I feel like going behind the scenes at these companies, whether an individual organization, I think the ultimate quest that we're all on is to be able to realize, to reveal our fullest potential. And these companies want to do that too. And you'll find that the majority of a day is either trying to process information or create something, right? Something's coming in, and then creativity or innovation coming out. But that the medium that all that's happening is a supercomputer. And so I go into companies to help them to be able to learn faster, to be able to keep up with the data overwhelm that everyone's struggling with. That's leading to a lot of health challenges. They call it information fatigue syndrome. Higher levels of higher blood pressure, compression of leisure time, more sleeplessness. I mean, all the factors that are really hindering our state of mind and body. And so that's a big health concern. I help them with also focus, because a lot of companies, we see that our capacity to concentrate is just reducing because of all these digital devices, right? Every time we get a like, a share, a comment, watch a cat video, whatever, we get this dopamine flood, and that's going along our motivation, our learning systems, tracks of our nervous system, and it's keeping us like, we can't maintain attention. So I'm very concerned a little bit with children that are growing up with swipes.
Yeah.
Everything is swipe here or there, and they're getting, and how does the education system be able to, how do you reconcile? My mother became a school teacher. You mentioned that I had learning challenges, and I had a decade and a half of daily 24-hour struggle with studies and put in special classes. But my mother became a special education teacher to try to help me, because she didn't know how to be able to support me in that arena. And I think one of the challenges is just we're not taught. And how does teachers? I feel so bad because it's not a. Teachers are some of the most caring, compassionate individuals, committed individuals. They might not be compensated maybe as they should, depending on where people live in the world. But it's a system issue. The world has changed so much, but our education system hasn't kept up necessarily. And a lot of people feel not prepared. So even at these companies, people feel like they're falling behind. And the biggest line item I know you have a lot of entrepreneurs who watch this, and if they have a team of employees, the biggest line item, for any business is human capital. And if half a day is being spent just processing information, 4 or 5 hours a day, you think about all the emails and texts and business plans, just all the content. If you could just cut that in half, like if I could show you how to learn that in half the time, and you could save a couple hours a day, that's transform. What would you use if you had 2 extra hours a day? What would you apply that to? And the great thing is, time is money, if you will. It's wealth. And it's the one thing we can't get back, which is why I'm so enthralled and so appreciative to be able to have this conversation with everyone watching, because I respect everyone watching this, because whether or not they paid for it or not, it's their time and their attention. And we live in this economy of, that's the attention economy that we're in. And so I want to make this, as valuable as anything else. And I really do believe, though, that that there's a big lie out there that knowledge is power. We hear it a lot, and we even say it a lot, but when you think about it, it's not really power. It has the potential to be power, but it only becomes power when we use it. And that really comes down to the questions that we ask on a regular basis. And so I also, when I'm in with these companies, you'll notice that certain cultures, if you think about a company culture as a set or of shared beliefs and behaviors, that some of them, the most innovative ones, are asking different questions than others. In terms of, we talked about the book I mentioned before, The Structure of Scientific Revolution, where a lot of evolution in any industry, fashion, automotive, any kind of technology usually comes from people outside, because it takes an outsider to look in to ask a different question.
Right.
Like an Elon Musk
Like
looking
Elon.
at the automotive saying, why with today's technology are you not doing it this way?
Right, right.
Yeah.
So you're kind of encouraging companies to have those questions.
To be able to find, I feel like we have these questions that are dormant, that are unconscious. And so if you could direct that. So for example, I'm obsessed with three questions. And we talked about dominant questions in our last conversation, about Will Smith and his dominant question, and your dominant question about bringing more joy to every single moment and bringing more magic. And that directs your focus, your reticular activating system, because at any moment, there's probably 2 billion stimuli we could be paying attention to. So primarily, our brain is a deletion device trying to keep all this information out, because we would go insane if all that novelty. And what do we decide to pay attention to is what we ask questions about that dictates our focus. And we know our focus determines where our energy goes, how we feel, and what we actually do. And you've had past guests talk about the science of epigenetics and how our thoughts in the present affect our physiology and gene expression and proteins. And so I believe thoughts are things, and if people truly knew how powerful their mind was, they wouldn't say, think, or feel something they didn't want to be true. And I'll say that again for people who are just dialed into this. If you knew how truly powerful your mind was, you wouldn't say, think, or feel something you didn't want to be true. And that's not to say you have one negative thought and it ruins your life, any more than eating that donut every once in a while does. But it's the consistency of doing that.
How come we don't know that? How come that's something that we gloss over so easily? Is it because we can't see our gray matter? Is it because we don't see the immediate correlation? But we talk about this so often, but why is that such a hard thing for people to understand? Do you ever think about that?
I think I have, and I've reflected on this a lot, that when you're first born, we're a blank slate, right? There's nothing there until we have an experience, and we try to avoid the pain. And so we come up with these global general beliefs about things that protect us. And so what I would say for this is, that's why I think practices of mindfulness they're so important, because it brings us in the moment. Know that our thoughts aren't who we are necessarily, but you've heard me say this when people come to me all the time at any event. And I just gave a talk recently, and people say things like, Jim, I have a horrible memory, or I'm getting too old, or I'm not smart enough. And I always tell people, if you fight for your limitations, you get to keep them, right? And you have to be careful and mindful of these thoughts. And that's why I think journaling is an important tool. Meditation is an important tool, because it sensitizes you to this inner talk, this critic, if you will, which incidentally, on a tangent, that inner talk is why we read so slow. And I know I'm going very tangential, but one of the things I teach companies, individuals, is to read 2 or 3 times faster. Imagine if you could go online and pick up, 30 books and read them in 30 or 60 days, what kind of advantage you would have, right? If a lot of your authors, you have a lot of your guests are authors and they have decades of experience, and if they could put it into a book and you could sit down and read that book in a few days, then you can download decades into days. And that's the biggest advantage that there is, because it saves you time and mistakes and errors, and it gives you also this level of expertise, where experts are some of the most valued people, in our society in terms of knowledge. There's not even there's a gap in wealth, but it's also a gap in those who know and those who don't know. And I feel like learning, and I'm not a great I don't play golf very well, so I don't play it very well. So it's this confidence loop in psychology, where if I play golf better, I probably play it more and I get better at it. And same thing with any kind of skill. But things with, when it comes to reading, most people say they're not a really great reader. And it's not their fault, because you're not born, going back to that blank slate, with the ability to read. You were taught in school. But when's the last time you took a class called reading? I mean, Brian, how old were you last time you took, not a college lit class, but a class called reading?
6 years old or something.
Right,
I don't
and
know.
and that's the thing. Most of us are still reading like we're 6 or 7 years old, and the difficulty and the demand has increased exponentially, but our skills haven't updated to that level. So that growing gap creates that stress.
Yeah, I struggle with reading. And is it because you think there's an inner voice going along with
Yeah, so
the
that
book's
inner voice is called subvocalization, meaning that if you have to say, you ever notice when you're reading something, you hear that inner voice inside your head reading along with you? Hopefully it's your own voice. It's not like somebody else's voice in there. The reason why it's an obstacle to your reading is because if you have to say the words inside your mind in order to understand them, then you can only read as fast as you could speak. That's why most people are slow readers, because they're saying the words, so their reading speed is limited to their talking speed, but not their thinking speed. That's why you can listen to a book on tape or a podcast at a higher speed, because you can understand that at that pace, but you can't speak at that pace.
Gotcha.
And here's the thing, when you're reading and you see all these words, 95% of those words are words you've seen many times, thousands of times, countless of times. So you don't have to pronounce a word or a series of words like New York City in order to understand what New York City is. And the best readers, the trained readers, they mitigate and reduce that subvocalization, read by sight. And that's a huge advantage, but we weren't taught that, because that subvocalization has been there ever since we were a child, when they pass around that book and teachers, you'd have to read it out loud.
Out loud, yeah.
And then later on, teachers said, read silently to yourself, read quietly to yourself, and we internalize that voice. But going back, that voice also is that critic or that doubter, the one that's a squelcher, that we don't want to make mistakes. And we know in terms of accelerated learning, the fastest learners are children. How fast can a child learn a musical instrument? How fast can they learn another language, right? They have this sense of wonder, and part of it is their neuroplasticity, but science is showing even now that no matter what your age, that you could grow older, but you could create new brain cells to the day you die. You could create new connections using the power of novelty and nutrition, and it's very amazing. But I think also children, they play, they're very playful. They're not afraid of making mistakes, right? A child learning how to walk could fall 4, 5, 6 times, or 4, 5, 600 times, but they never after 12 times say, okay, I'm quitting. I'm not gonna do this because I don't wanna look bad. But adults, we do that.
Yeah.
If we're honest, most adults, they'll try something once or twice, and then they have that fear of looking bad. And I feel like that's what keeps us from living the person we're supposed to be, is that inner critic of fear of looking bad to others. And you and I have talked about this, you could go broke buying into the opinions and expectations of those around us. And for those people who are trying to find their passion and their purpose, and I know a lot of your viewers ask about that, I feel like sometimes we know it, but it's buried underneath all that other stuff. Yeah. And we're always scared about what other people are gonna think about it. But going back to begin with the end in mind, when we're in that coffin, there's not a lot of room in there for possessions. And I'm all for people, you can have all the toys and everything, but there's also not a lot of room in there for regret. And so we want to live each day coming from that place.
I had a guest on recently, a William von Hippel, and he said there's two types of errors. He said one is omission and one is commission. And Jeff Bezos has something called his regret minimization hypothesis. And on his deathbed, he doesn't want to regret doing things, and that's, I guess, the regret of omission. And then the commission is usually when we do something and we feel stupid about it.
Right.
But that's not something that on your deathbed you regret. You don't usually regret the things you did do, it's the things you didn't do. So it's something definitely worth thinking about. Did you go out there and try that and take that risk? And in the short term, it might feel painful when you miss it. In the long term, it maybe becomes a good story to tell people. And then hopefully in your deathbed, you've looked back and said, okay, I gave everything a shot. But that's a hard place to get to, I think, for a lot of people.
It is, but I think a through line of people that have the kind of impact that they want to have is they're not a thermometer, but they identify more with that thermostat that you and I have talked about. That a thermometer just reacts to the environment, and we react to the weather and everything else, the politics and how people treat us. But ultimately, a thermostat sets a standard, it sets a goal, it sets a vision, and then the environment, it rises to be able to meet that. And I was doing this training I do a lot with actors, as you mentioned, to speed read scripts, remember their lines.
It'd be difficult for actors to do that.
It is, because if you ever look at the script, remembering things verbatim, memory obviously is something that's very useful, especially if people, even if you toast at a wedding, or you need to give any kind of public speech, or you need to make videos, or be able to have a one-on-one meeting with a client or do a sales call, and it helps to have information at your mental fingertips. It's just we haven't been taught how to be able to memorize those kind of things, and that's what, every single episode that you've listened to of our podcast is just like, this is how you do it, because it's taking a noun like memory and turning it into a verb. And just like we talked about focus, you don't have focus, you do focus. You don't have creativity and you don't wake up hoping that you could have creativity so you can make videos and write and paint, but there's a process for creativity. And so what if we could take that magic and deconstruct it into methods for people? So this is how you can do these certain things, and then it becomes a verb, and then what it gives you your sovereignty back. It gives you your personal power back, because the locus, we were talking about location before, of control is on the inside. Because I imagine with a lot of your guests that talk about the science of happiness, that they know that ultimately it's within them and not on circumstance. Because you could always find a counterexample for somebody who didn't have the money, they didn't have the education, they didn't have the connections, and they still succeeded at huge levels. And if you look at those outliers and maybe study the outliers instead of just marginalizing them and not keeping them part of that study.
So turn those nouns into verbs.
Yeah.
That's what people should really think about, because the nouns make them limitations, and the verbs means that you can take an active part in changing.
Right, because part of the things that you're saying about why don't we understand these beliefs and inner talks, and we hear it, but we're not really applying it. We sensitize ourselves to it, but we're also putting ourselves in hypnosis all the time by using certain words, and it automatically doesn't give us the power. So our mind is always eavesdropping on our self-talk. So to be conscious and cognizant of it, I think self-awareness it's a superpower, that your brain is like this supercomputer, and your self-talk is the program it's going to run. So if you tell yourself you're not good at remembering names or remembering anything, then you're not going to remember the name of the next person you meet, because you program your supercomputer not to. So the nature of my work is using the metaphor of a supercomputer, and that's not completely accurate like any metaphor, but part of it is the hardware, and then the other part is like the software it's running. So the hardware is like a good brain diet, right? It's getting good proper sleep, it's avoiding head injuries like wearing a helmet, and avoiding environmental toxins, these invisible supervillains that are affecting our minds that people don't talk about. But it's like, we were talking about it before when we were talking about sleep before on camera, and talking about hotel rooms, and what if there was the supervillain? What if you had clean air? Because air, that obviously oxygen, your brain is only 2% of your body mass, but it requires 20% of the oxygen and the nutrients. And so it has different demands. And so, it's challenging when there's some kind of pollution going through your system. So there's air, there's also light. Certain light is not really great for your mind and your focus. And sometimes in offices or schools, they use the most inexpensive lights. And when they do studies with like mice, it has adverse effects. So there's air, there's light, there's water, because we know your brain is 70% water. And a lot of times when people are tired, they go to food, but they should really hydrate. And we can lose a lot of water even when we sleep, through respiration and perspiration. So hydration, it's just a small dip in hydration can reduce your reaction time, your thinking, somewhere in the neighborhood of 30%. So drinking water is one of the most important things we do, but that's the quality of water. You should have it tested in your home, because I've had friends that have high levels of heavy metals just because of the water supply, and they had no idea. And then finally, I would say EMFs, invisible. So you have air, you have light, you have water, which is not really invisible, but it's kind of see-through. And also EMFs, these electromagnetic fields that are everywhere, and we don't know how humans didn't have that years, and certainly not 100 years ago. And so what's that effect having on our brains? Because our brains they're sensitive. And I read recently that 90% of kids that have cell phones, they sleep with it underneath their pillows, and we just don't know. So be able to have, and they have like paint now that actually blocks out. Have you seen this? Like this black paint, you could paint your bedroom.
Okay.
Because some people say that certain sleep disorders that they're having is just because there's so many Wi-Fi running through their home or their building or cell towers. And I this is not my expertise, but it makes some sense.
We've got 5G coming. There's a lot of people talking about that.
Right.
Because that's pretty powerful stuff as well. So
it is. And the technology that's out there, I love this kind of conversation because while we're talking about where the world's going, and you mentioned Elon Musk and he's going out to space, and but this is the space I'm interested in right here. We talk about technology, but I'm very interested in this technology.
Right. And a lot of what you teach is discipline. Is that right? As far as what not to do sometimes with your brain, as far as what not to do first thing in the morning, and how not to interact with your technology, and how to give yourself that space. Am I right?
You have, Chaka has that discipline equals, freedom. And I know that was a powerful episode. I would say that you could have your to-do list, and the most successful achievers, they also have a not to-do list, because they know that their time and their attention, it's a finite resource, and too many people say yes, as we've heard, to good. Jim Collins, good to great. Say no to good, so you can say yes to great things. And so having a not to-do list, your non-negotiables of things that you just won't entertain, will help you to put first things first. And a lot of times the things on there are really, they lead to distraction, they lead to productivity holes that we have. And one of them we've talked about, you and I, is our phone. That so many, we're not using our phone as much as our phone is using us. And technology is meant to be a tool to magnify our experience, not good or bad. Like fire it heats your food or it burns down your home. It's just how it's applied. But some of us go to our phones out of boredom, right? We open up, and it's great, again, because it helps us to be able to democratize this information and bring inspiration and instruction to people that crave it and that could use it. But it also, sometimes when we pick it out of boredom, then the technology is really using us, but it's meant to be a tool. But if that technology is using us, then who becomes the tool in that equation, right? And that's not the goal. And so but it's hard though, because for some people, it's like an addiction.
Yeah.
And we've talked about addictions, you and I, in conversation, but it is acting like a drug for people when you have to pick it out of that bored state.
How do you work with companies when that is their business, technology?
Right.
Do they admit that they also have to be disciplined about their own tech?
Yes, and so it's all about, and people have to find their own harmony, whatever that happens to be for them. So some people, they have to check their email because of their career or their vocation first thing in the morning. I always recommend people not do it, ideally the first hour of the day, because we're just, in the first hour of the day, it's just when we're relaxed and we're highly suggestible, our brains are being rewired by our smart devices to be distracted, number one, but also to be reactive, like we talked about. It's just you're fighting fires. You get one voicemail or text message or email with some bad news. It just hijacks your whole day. Yeah. And so it's hard to have that discipline, but there's huge rewards that come from it. And it's an exercise. And just like with our focus is very much like a muscle. It grows stronger with use. But if a lot of us we're not feeding our focus, we're feeding our distractions, and that muscle is getting stronger. But the good news is we have control and we have responsibility. And the goal is just not to be running old scripts, to be conscious. I think the meta message of this conversation is that we are not our thoughts. We do these thoughts, and that we could always, and also these feelings and these behaviors. So when we're talking about habits, research is suggesting about 40% of our day is unconscious, habitual. And I would even argue probably more than that. It's these unconscious scripts, because we don't want to employ the nervous system energy, the mental energy to be able to, that's why it's so important to design our routines that we've talked about. The first hour of the day that we've heard, that if you want to win the day, you got to win that first hour to create positive momentum in your day. But the reason why you turn into routines is so you don't have to deplete mental energy in terms of what are you going to wear, what are you going to eat, what are you going to do, all these things, when you could apply it towards the areas of your life that really need it to make that kind of progress.
What are some of your non-negotiables in the first hour of the day?
So for me, the phone is top of the list, and I'm not saying it's easy, but I have an analog clock. I don't have to rely on it too much. It's funny when you set the intention to wake up. Have you ever done that, saying I need to be up at this time, and you actually wake up like a minute or two?
I have, yeah.
Yeah,
I've done it. I don't do it regularly, but I've done that.
It's interesting when you put your complete faith and trust and belief that it's like when we teach people a process of lucid dreaming, like how to be aware of their dreams and also start controlling their dreams so you could turn them into like little learning opportunities. We did a whole episode on 6 steps on how to remember your dreams, because people don't realize this, and I'll go to the morning non-negotiables.
I want to talk about dreams for sure. So.
Yeah, it's one of those things where people don't realize that when you're learning all day as a student, or you're an entrepreneur, you're trying to solve problems, your brain doesn't shut off at night. If anything, it's more active at night, and it's consolidating short to long-term memory. It's cleaning out plaque that leads to brain aging challenges, but also you're having your dreams, 3, 4, 5 dreams. And when you're talking about sleep, and you've had Matthew on the show, and you've talked about why we sleep. The other thing is we could spend probably about 20 years of our life dreaming, like sleeping, which means about 3 to 5 years pure dreaming, which is incredible. And those dreams can be a big resource for us in terms of creativity, invention. Mary Shelley came up with Frankenstein in her dream. Paul McCartney came up with the song Yesterday in his dream. Jack Nicklaus, I remember, 1964? He was going through a little bit of a slump where he was shooting high 70s, and he had a dream of shifting in his dream. It was so vivid. He changed his grip just slightly in his dream, and the next morning he was back on track, doing like mid 60s, in terms of his score. So we have the periodic table came to a chemist in his dream. Elias Howe created the sewing machine in his dream. So what are we dreaming about? But we forget them when we wake up.
Or ignore them.
Right, ignore them.
99% of the people have no process of remembering, acknowledging, recording their dreams, right?
Right, and I feel like that's another untapped resource for people. So one of the things, the reason why when people wake up in the morning on my not to do is not pick up the phone, because I spend a few minutes just recording my dream while it's fresh, or reflecting on my dreams instead of being hijacked by external technology. Because you have to really, when I was saying your brain is this deletion device, we have to control the input and where it's coming from. And most people, sometimes we get mentally lazy. And I can understand that. We suffer from decision fatigue because we've all had the experience where we had a really tough day and we might be at a restaurant or looking at a takeout menu and we don't know what we want to eat because we've used up all our decisions throughout that day. And
we do have a finite number of decisions every day, or at least intelligent decisions.
This is true.
Okay.
And I've had this conversation with doctors. We just had Dr. Oz on the show, and we were talking about how, traveling from country to country, how you maintain your mental alertness. And we were talking about how even off camera, how doctors, if you're going to get surgery, you want to make sure you're one of those first couple of patients, because there's an immense amount of resources, mental and physical resources going in to that procedure, and you don't want somebody who's depleted.
I had a hernia surgery a few years ago, and I really wanted to tell the guy, look, have a quiet night, get some sleep.
Exactly.
I thought that would maybe insult him, but
I heard, I don't know if this is true, but when Clinton, when Obama asked Clinton about what some of your gold piece of advice, he was like, Clinton said, don't make a decision when you're sleep deprived, an important decision, because that's how important sleep is. And so sleep is it's one of the most important life advice, is to prioritize sleep. And even if you and I were talking about this again before camera, is we know what to do, and then some people have challenges with sleep apnea, with insomnia, but just being sensitized to it just is similar to remembering names. We teach many different methods on how to walk into a room, meet 20 strangers, and leave saying goodbye using their name, every single one of them. But just being sensitized to, hey, just a reminder, it's important to remember someone's name. Because how are you going to show somebody you're going to care for their business, their future, their finances, their family, their health, whatever it is you're selling them or offering them, if you don't care just to remember who they are?
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below.